Chapter 1. The Moment Everything Fell Apart. My name is Marina Holtz, and if you had met me a year ago, you would have seen a woman who still believed loyalty could hold a marriage together. I spent 12 years building a quiet life, a home filled with routines and small comforts, never imagining the person I trusted most was slowly turning that life into a trap. The morning my husband left me for a 23-year-old intern and emptied our joint account felt like a sudden fall, but the truth is the ground had been cracking beneath me for a long time. I just refused to look down. I thought heartbreak was the worst he could give me until I discovered the forged loan, the stolen money, and the lies that reached far beyond our marriage. That was the moment I realized losing him wasn't the devastation I feared. It was the beginning of getting myself back. Seattle felt muted that morning, the kind of pale gray that settles over the city when rain has not arrived yet, but is already in the air. I had been at Holt in Harbor Boutique since 7, unpacking a shipment of spring dresses while checking emails from contractors preparing the build-out for my second location. My mind was busy but steady. The day felt ordinary in the way days sometimes do right before they break open. I was helping a woman choose between 2 tailored coats when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I almost ignored it. I should have ignored it. But something made my hand move, a small instinctive pull that came from months of feeling Daniel drift into someone I did not recognize. The screen showed a text from him. The words sat in one single block, almost casual. He said he was done with our marriage. He said he was leaving with Tessa Monroe, the intern, who had joined his office barely 6 months earlier. He said she understood him in ways I never could. He ended it with a comment about my age, written with the kind of careless cruelty that still had enough power to slice. Then he told me he had emptied our joint account. For a moment, the edges of my vision tightened. The woman beside me kept talking about the coats, unaware that the life I had built for almost 2 decades had just been shoved off a cliff. I nodded and guided her to the register. My voice stayed level, almost detached, as if it belonged to someone watching me from a distance. Shock sat somewhere deep, but it did not rise. I would not give it space. When she left with her purchase, I allowed myself a single breath that trembled only slightly. Then another buzz. Daniel again. This time he bragged about booking a Miami trip with our joint credit card. He wrote that he deserved a vacation after everything he had endured with me. The smug tone was familiar. I had heard versions of it for months. I typed a quick message to my staff saying I needed 10 minutes in the back room, then stepped inside and shut the door. I dialed the bank. My voice was steady when I explained the fraudulent charges. The representative remained professional, following procedure, confirming that the card would be locked and any transactions investigated. Nothing more. No chatter. No judgment. It was almost comforting in its neutrality. When the call ended, I scrolled back through Daniel's texts. I did not feel rage. Not yet. Mostly I felt clarity. So many things from the last year fell neatly into place. The password changes, the unexplained overtime that never showed in his paychecks, the money that disappeared from the joint account, always followed by some flimsy excuse, the sudden gym membership, the clothes that did not fit his usual style, the bright new confidence that came from someone else's attention, not mine. 12 months ago, I had opened a private bank account. I had not told Daniel. I had moved my savings there little by little, amounts small enough not to attract questions. I had started keeping a folder with screenshots, receipts, statements. At the time, I told myself I was being sensible. Today, I understood I had been preparing for survival. My phone rang again. I saw Linda Holt's name. Daniel's mother had always been polite with me, even warm at times, but she loved her son fiercely. I answered, keeping my tone neutral. She started with accusation. Daniel told her I had been cold and impossible to live with. She said he claimed I had sabotaged his trip. I let her finish. Then I offered calmly to read her Daniel's actual messages. The silence that followed held a crack of doubt. She ended the call quickly, unsettled. I stepped out of the back room and returned to the sales floor. The day moved forward in its quiet rhythm. Customers browsed, my staff folded clothes. No one saw the storm circling closer, not fully. During my lunch break, I walked to the staff room and called Sophie Grant. I told her the time had come. She had been ready for weeks. She confirmed that the paperwork could be filed immediately and that it would be straightforward given the evidence I had gathered. She asked how I was holding up. I said I was fine. It was not entirely true, but it was true enough to keep me steady. By evening, the boutique had emptied. I locked the door and felt the weight of the day finally settle into my shoulders. The sky outside had darkened, but the air smelled like rain that could break at any moment. I drove home through familiar streets lined with evergreens and quiet coffee shops. Seattle had always been a place where endings and beginnings blended easily, a city that held both melancholy and resilience in the same breath. My house waited at the top of a gentle hill. I inherited it from my aunt in 2010, years before Daniel pushed me to add his name to the deed. I had always refused. I never had a clear reason then, only an instinct. Tonight, I was grateful for every moment I had trusted that instinct. Inside, I set my bag on the dining room table and pulled out the folder containing 12 months of evidence. Statements, screenshots, irregular withdrawals, printed copies of messages he thought I would never keep. I spread them out and began organizing them into the order Sophie preferred. As I worked, I felt the ache of what I was losing. Not the marriage itself, but the years tied to it. The version of Daniel I had loved once, a gentle man who used to make coffee for me before his morning shifts. That man had been gone for a long time. I realized that now, without bitterness. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater. I finished sorting the documents, placed them in a neat stack, and slid them into a folder. The legal battle was still ahead, but the first step had been taken. I washed my hands, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. Outside, rain finally began tapping against the windows. I listened to it for a long moment, letting the sound settle my chest. Tomorrow, everything would move forward in ways I could not yet see. I let the thought rest, steady and calm, and ended the day there. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Facade. By the time my alarm went off, the rain had settled into a soft, steady curtain outside, turning the streetlights into blurry yellow halos. For a moment, I lay still and listened to it, letting the sound remind me that no matter what Daniel had decided in the middle of his little getaway, the world outside my house was still intact. I got up, made coffee, packed a small lunch, and put the folder of documents into my bag. It was just another weekday in Seattle, at least on the surface. The boutique smelled like new fabric and cedar when I unlocked the door. I turned on the lights, checked the registers, and watched my staff come in one by one, with sleepy greetings and travel mugs in their hands. I did not tell them anything yet. The story of my marriage ending by text did not belong in the morning huddle. We had customers to take care of, deliveries to process, a second location that still needed fixtures and permits and contractor schedules. The first customer of the day was a woman in her 50s who had been shopping with me for years. She asked how I was doing in that way women sometimes do when they already suspect you are carrying something heavy. I said I was fine. My face must have done something because she paused, reached out, squeezed my arm, and said that whatever it was, I would get through it. For a second, my throat tightened. I just nodded and helped her choose a blazer for her job interview, listening to her talk about starting over after a layoff. It was impossible not to see the parallel. When the store got busier, I moved between fitting rooms, racks, and the front counter, letting the rhythm of work carry me along. Every few minutes, my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I did not look at it right away. When I finally checked it in a quiet moment near the back, the screen was full of messages from Daniel. He wrote that I had been cold for years, that any man would have done what he did. He wrote that I deserved someone who made him feel young, that I had become obsessed with my business and had stopped paying attention to him. He called draining the account a way of evening things out. It was textbook gaslighting, written in the same casual tone he had used when reminding me to pick up milk. I did not respond. Instead, I took screenshots and sent them to a private cloud folder I had created for evidence. My fingers shook once and then steadied. Each message that blamed me was another piece of clarity. Each excuse he typed only made my path forward simpler. Near mid-morning, my phone rang. I stepped into the back room, checked the screen, and saw Linda's name again. I let it ring once more, then answered. Her voice sounded tired this time, but the words still came out sharp. She repeated what Daniel had told her, that I had ruined his vacation, that I had been planning to leave him anyway, that I had turned him into the villain with my friends. I listened, my eyes on the cement floor, my back against the cool wall. When she finished, I told her quietly what had actually been written in his texts, including the part where he had mocked my age and bragged about taking all the money. I offered to forward the screenshots. On the other end of the line, I heard a long exhale and something like a crack in her certainty. She said that Daniel had always been a good boy. I said that, once, he had been a good husband too. She did not apologize. She did not shout either. She just said she needed time to think and ended the call. The rest of the morning went by in stretches of normal retail work. In the early afternoon, one of my associates mentioned seeing an article headline about a regional shipping company under some kind of financial audit. I felt my stomach prick with recognition. Daniel worked in logistics at a company called Northwest Freight Line. I did not say anything. I just felt the ground under my feet shift a little. Around 2, the bell over the door rang and a familiar man walked in, looking almost exactly as he had in college, only with a few more lines at the corners of his eyes. Eric Navarro smiled when he saw me and opened his arms. We hugged in the middle of the boutique, two old friends who had not seen each other in years. He asked how life was. I told him the boutique was growing, that I was opening a new location. I said it in a steady voice and did not mention that my husband had left me yesterday by text. We stood near a rack of dresses, catching up, talking about mutual friends, and how strange it felt to be in our 40s now. Eventually, he mentioned his work. He said he was with the state in the financial investigation division. He said work had been busy lately, that a few mid-sized companies were under review for some questionable books. He did not name Northwest Freight Line. He didn't have to. My mind connected the dots on its own. I asked in a light tone if he had ever heard of Daniel's company. He said that if I was married to someone there, I should probably keep good records. Then he looked at me with a kind of knowing sympathy that told me he had said as much as he could. After he left, the air in the boutique felt heavier, but somehow more defined. There was a bigger, darker shape behind Daniel's behavior than I had realized. This was not just about an affair or a drained bank account. He was playing with bigger fires. When I got a break later that afternoon, I stepped outside and called home. Olivia answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded distant, guarded. I asked how school was, whether she had eaten lunch. She gave short answers and then told me that her father had called her the night before. He said he had promised to help her get a car if she stayed on his side, if she told people the divorce was my idea. She laughed a little when she said it, but there was no humor in the sound. I leaned against the cool brick of the building and chose my words carefully. I told her she did not have to pick sides, that the problems between me and her father were not her fault and not her job to fix. She asked in a small voice if I was going to be okay financially. I told her yes, that I had planned for things like this, even if I had hoped they would never happen. She hesitated and then said that Dad had sounded excited, that he said Tessa made him feel alive. The knife twisted a little, but I did not let it show. I told Olivia I loved her, that she could always ask me anything. When we hung up, I stayed outside for a minute, letting the cool air clear my head. Back inside, during a rare lull, I opened my personal social media and typed in Tessa's name. Her profile was public. Picture after picture showed her in new clothes, at expensive restaurants, holding drinks at rooftop bars that did not match an intern's salary. In one photo, she wore a handbag I recognized from a luxury brand Daniel once said we could not afford. The tags on several posts showed hotels, flights, weekend getaways. I took screenshots of everything. If my husband wanted to pretend this was just a matter of the heart, the financial trail told a different story. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. She asked if I could come by her office at the end of the day, that she had found something in the title records on the house and wanted to go over it in person. The wording was careful, but urgent enough to make my chest tighten. I closed the boutique early, telling my staff I had an appointment and that I trusted them to finish the closing checklist. The drive to Sophie's office wound through downtown traffic, past office buildings and people hurrying with umbrellas and takeaway coffee. The sky was beginning to clear, streaks of pale blue breaking through the clouds. Sophie's office sat on the 10th floor of a mid-rise near the courthouse. I checked in with the receptionist, waited a few minutes in a quiet lobby with framed photos of cityscapes on the walls, then stepped into Sophie's conference room when she called my name. She had a stack of papers laid out on the table, my name printed on several of them, some bearing the address of my house. She greeted me with a brief hug and that particular look attorneys get when something is both serious and manageable if handled correctly. As I sat down across from her and opened my notebook, the feeling settled over me that we were crossing into a different stage of this fight. It was no longer just about emotions or betrayal. Numbers, signatures, and legal lines were involved now. I folded my hands on the table, steadied my breathing, and waited for her to begin. Chapter 3: Evidence and Alliances. Sophie rested her fingertips on the stack of papers between us and gave me a look that told me she had been practicing how to say what she was about to say. She said softly, "Marina, I need you to take a breath and remember that we caught this before it went any further." That was not the kind of sentence that ever meant something good. I nodded and waited. She slid the top document toward me and tapped the page. My name was printed neatly near the bottom, on a line labeled borrower. Above it were numbers I did not need an accounting degree to understand. She said, "This is a home equity loan for $92,000. Chapter 3: Evidence and Alliances. Sophie rested her fingertips on the stack of papers between us and gave me a look that told me she had been practicing how to say what she was about to say. She said softly, "Marina, I need you to take a breath and remember that we caught this before it went any further." That was not the kind of sentence that ever meant something good. I nodded and waited. She slid the top document toward me and tapped the page. My name was printed neatly near the bottom, on a line labeled borrower. Above it were numbers I did not need an accounting degree to understand. She said, "This is a home equity loan for $92,000, recorded against your house 3 months ago." My eyes went to the signature. It was my name, shaped almost like my hand, but there was a stiffness in the letters, a small flick at the end that was not mine. It felt like looking at a photograph that had been edited just enough to be wrong. My voice sounded calm when I finally spoke. "I did not sign this." "I know," she said. "We compared it with previous documents. The bank sent over the file this morning. If you look here, the notary stamp is from someone who has already been flagged in another case. I am almost certain your husband is involved. But for now, what matters is that we can challenge this. You are not on the hook for this debt." The words should have comforted me, but there was a wave beneath them. It was one thing for Daniel to empty a checking account. It was another for him to put my home at risk with my forged name. I felt a tightness behind my eyes and pressed my fingertips together under the table so they would not shake. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We move quickly," Sophie replied. "We filed to dispute the loan as fraudulent, and we include this in the divorce filing as evidence of financial misconduct. We also request an emergency order to freeze all joint assets before he can move more money." I stared at the neat columns of numbers on the page. Somewhere between Daniel telling me I was too focused on my business and him buying cocktails on a rooftop with a girl half my age, he had sat down and signed my name on the line that could have taken my house. I let out a slow breath. "Then that is what we do," I said. She studied me for a moment, maybe expecting me to crack. When I did not, she gave a small nod of respect. We went through the rest of the paperwork, the timelines, the filings that would go out over the next 48 hours. By the time I left her office, the city outside had darkened, and the streets glistened with reflected light. That night, after dinner alone at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop and pulled up social media again. Tessa had been busy. The posts were still there, but the tone had shifted. The earlier ones showed hotel pools and sparkling drinks held up for the camera. The new ones were shorter, captions complaining about stress and things not going as planned. One story showed a hotel room with half-packed bags and a view of a parking lot instead of an ocean. In one photo, she wore a pair of designer shoes I knew Daniel could not honestly afford. Another showed him cut off at the shoulder, his watch visible as he held a glass. The comments from her friends were full of envy and curiosity. I did not feel envy. I felt something closer to pity. And then I reminded myself that pity was a luxury I could not afford right now. I took screenshots methodically and saved them in the same folder as everything else. Tessa was grown. She had made her choices. I did not need to chase her down or scream at her. The paper trail would speak louder than any confrontation could. 2 days later, Eric stopped by the boutique again. It was early afternoon and the store was quiet. He came in wearing a navy jacket and the expression of someone who spends his days looking at numbers that do not add up. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Functional," I said. "How's the glamorous world of state finance?" He gave a short laugh. "Glamorous is one word for it. Busy is another. I cannot talk about any active cases, you know that, but I can give you friendly advice as a friend." I leaned on the counter. "Go ahead." "If you suspect financial misconduct," he said, picking his words with care, "stay very close to your attorney. Do not sign anything your husband or his representatives put in front of you without her. Do not agree to any side deals. Let everything go through proper channels." "I was never much of a side deal Carson," I said. "Good," he replied. "And keep documenting. Judges like paper. They do not care about charm." He squeezed my shoulder and changed the subject, asking about the second location, about old classmates. When he left, I felt a little steadier, like someone had quietly checked the locks on my reality. That evening, as I was closing the boutique, I saw Mate Kingston coming up the sidewalk. She walked slowly, bundled in a wool coat, her gray hair tucked under a knit hat. May had lived down the street from my house for as long as I owned it. She knew everyone's business, but she also kept an eye on the block. I stepped outside and greeted her. "May, what brings you out in this cold?" I asked. She held up a small flash drive in her gloved hand. "I thought you might need this, honey." I frowned. "What is it?" "Footage from my security camera. You know I have them all around the house after that break-in years ago. A couple of weeks back, I saw your husband in the alley behind your garage late at night. It bothered me enough that I saved the clip. When I heard he left, I figured this might not be nothing." We went back into the shop, and I plugged the drive into the office computer. The video showed a grainy, black and white image of Daniel near my garage door, looking around before using a key to slip inside. He stayed about 10 minutes and came out carrying a box I recognized from my storage shelves. I felt my jaw clench. "I did not know he came by that night," I said quietly. "I don't know what's going on, but men don't sneak into their own garages at midnight unless they up to something. You give that to your lawyer, let her tear into it." I thanked her, hugged her carefully, and promised to check in on her later in the week. The next day, the school called. Olivia had gotten into an argument in the hallway with another girl who made a comment about her father running off with a younger woman. Words had been exchanged, sharp and fast, and a teacher had stepped in before it became anything more. I drove to the school with a knot in my stomach. In the counselor's office, Olivia sat with her arms crossed, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. The counselor explained the situation in measured tones and then left us alone for a moment. Olivia spoke first. "I'm tired of people talking about us. They don't know anything. They all act like you're perfect and he's some monster." I sat in the chair next to her. "Your father is not a monster, but he has made some very bad choices that affect both of us." "He told me you're making this worse than it is," she shot back. "He said you always cared more about the store than him." The words landed familiar and stale. I took a breath. I know he said that. He's been saying things like that to a lot of people. That doesn't make them true. I have loved him, and I have worked hard. Those two things are not opposites. She looked away, jaw tight. "I just don't want to lose both of you." "You're not going to lose me," I said. "And whatever happens between me and your father, he's still your dad. You're allowed to love him, but you are not responsible for fixing what he broke." Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The bell rang somewhere in the building, muffled through the walls. The counselor came back in and we discussed some basic consequences and how to help Olivia handle comments without exploding. When we left, she walked a little closer to me than she had on the way in. Later that week, Linda came by the boutique. She looked older than I remembered, as if the last few days had added years. We sat in the corner near the window, away from customers. "I spoke to Daniel," she said, twisting her purse strap in her hands. "He asked me for money, said things were tight, that you had frozen everything. He said you were trying to ruin him." I let the words settle between us. "I haven't ruined anything," I answered. "I am protecting myself from things he's already done. Did he tell you about the loan in my name? Did he tell you about the house?" She blinked. "No." I explained in simple terms, not to punish her, but because lies thrive in darkness. She listened, eyes filling with a mix of confusion and dawning fear. "I do not know who to believe," she whispered. "You do not have to decide today," I said, "but you should look at documents, not just listen to stories. If you ever want to see the paperwork, I will show you." She nodded slowly, then stood and left, walking like someone who had just realized the ground under her feet was not as solid as she thought. That evening, as I was counting the register, my phone rang. Sophie's name appeared on the screen. I answered on the second ring. "The judge signed the order," she said. her voice carrying a quiet satisfaction. All joint assets are frozen as of this afternoon. He will not be able to move anything significant without triggering alarms. Enforcement starts within 24 hours. For the first time in days, I felt something like real relief. Thank you. What do you need from me next? Tomorrow, we will start preparing for the emergency hearing. I will email you a list of what to bring. Try to get some sleep tonight if you can. After I closed up, I walked slowly through the boutique, turning off lights one by one. The mannequins in the windows stood frozen in their outfits, unbothered by human mess. I locked the door, checked it twice, then looked at my reflection in the glass. There was a long road ahead, but the path was at least marked now. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle, and then I turned toward the darkening street and headed home. Chapter 4: Courtroom Truth and Collapse. Morning came earlier than I wanted. I barely remembered falling asleep, but the alarm on my phone pulled me up anyway, into a gray light that seeped through the blinds. My stomach felt tight and hollow, a mix of coffee and nerves. This was the day we would stand in front of a judge and lay out, piece by piece, what Daniel had done. I dressed carefully, the same way I did for important meetings. A simple, dark dress, low boots, a blazer that made me feel like someone who knew what she was doing. In the mirror, my face looked older than it had a year ago, but steadier too. I picked up the folder Sophie had asked me to bring and headed out into the cool Seattle air. The courthouse downtown smelled like old paper and cleaning solution. Security was routine, the guards polite, their eyes sliding over me and on to the next person. Sophie was already waiting outside the assigned courtroom when I arrived, a folder in one hand and a coffee in the other. She greeted me with a small smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I would rather be anywhere else," I said. "But I am here." "That is what matters," she replied. "Remember, we have facts. He has stories." She touched my arm lightly. Then we both turned as Daniel came down the hallway. If I had expected him to look victorious, I was wrong. His shoulders were hunched, his suit slightly rumpled as if he had slept in it. There were dark circles under his eyes. He glanced around, almost furtive, and for a second our gazes met. There was a flash of something like resentment, then he looked away. Tessa was nowhere in sight. His attorney, a man in a navy suit with a too bright tie, walked beside him, whispering. They passed us without speaking. Linda was there too, sitting on a bench a little way down the hall, her purse clutched to her chest. Her eyes darted between me and her son. Olivia sat next to her, looking smaller than usual, her hands knotted in her lap. The bailiff opened the courtroom door and called our case. The air inside felt cooler, more filtered, as if emotion had to be toned down to enter. We took our places at the tables, me beside Sophie, Daniel beside his attorney. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a measured voice, looked over the file in front of her and then at us. "We are here today for an emergency hearing regarding financial matters in the Holt divorce case," she said. "I will hear from petitioner first." Sophie stood. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried easily in the quiet room. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Holt, has submitted evidence showing that Mr. Holt drained their joint account without consent, used marital funds for a trip with a third party, accessed her separate property without permission, and participated in a fraudulent loan recorded against her home with a forged signature. We are asking the court to freeze remaining assets under his control and to affirm her sole ownership of her premarital home and business interests." She walked the judge through each piece of evidence. The texts where Daniel bragged about emptying the account, screenshots of the card statement showing airline tickets and hotel charges around the time he had texted about Miami, the security footage from May's camera showing him slipping into my garage and leaving with a box, a home equity loan document with my name signed in a way that did not quite match my real signature. As each item was explained, the weight of it settled in the room. Daniel shifted in his chair, his jaw flexing. His attorney took notes, but his expression grew tighter. When it was their turn, the attorney stood and did what he could. Your Honor, my client was under significant emotional distress at the time. The marriage had broken down and he felt financially sidelined by Mrs. Holt's business decisions. Any mistakes he may have made with the joint account were a result of this stress. As for the loan, my client denies forging any signature and maintains that his actions were intended to support the family. The judge looked at him without much expression. Being upset does not excuse fraud. Do you have any evidence to contradict the documents presented? He hesitated. At this time, we do not, but we would request additional time to gather information. Sophie rose again. Your Honor, while counsel may wish for more time, the pattern is already clear. My client's home and separate business are at risk. The longer this is left unaddressed, the greater the potential harm. The judge nodded slowly, flipping back through the file. She was quiet for a moment, then looked up. I have reviewed the materials submitted. There is substantial indication of financial misconduct on Mr. Holt's part. I will be granting the freeze on joint assets and affirming her sole ownership of her premarital home and business interest, subject to final orders in the divorce. Relief moved through my body, but I kept my face composed. This was not victory. It was simply protection. We expected back to be the heart of the hearing, but Sophie had one more thing. Your Honor, she said, I would like to also enter into the record a copy of a newly filed court document and a draft article from a reputable news outlet that went live this morning. They concern an ongoing investigation into financial misconduct at Northwest Freight Line, where Mr. Holt is employed. She handed copies to the clerk, who passed them up. My heart picked up speed. I had not seen these yet. As the judge skimmed the documents, Sophie summarized carefully. A civil complaint and regulatory following named Mr. Holt's supervisor, Mr. Bruce Carter, as a primary actor in misappropriating company funds. Mr. Holt is identified as participating in the movement of those funds, though not as a primary defendant. We are not asking this court to rule on that case, only to consider it in assessing the credibility of Mr. Holt's financial conduct and the need for strict controls. The judge's mouth tightened. Mr. Holt, are you currently under investigation at your place of employment for financial irregularities? Daniel cleared his throat. That is an internal company issue. It has nothing to do with my marriage. It speaks to your handling of money and to your pattern of behavior. I could feel Linda's gaze on the back of my head from the gallery. I did not turn around. The judge confirmed her earlier ruling, then added that Mr. Holt's behavior raised serious concerns. She made notes about a pattern of financial misconduct and indicated that it would weigh heavily in future decisions. When the hearing ended, everyone stood. The bailiff called the next case, and we filed out into the hallway. The air felt thicker suddenly, filled with the sounds of shoes on tile, murmured conversations, and the distant ring of a phone. My phone buzzed in my bag. I stepped aside and checked it. An email notification from an address I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the name. Tessa Monroe. I opened it. She wrote that she was sorry things had gotten so messy. She said she had known about the loan, that Daniel had told her signing his name on certain things was just a formality. Attached were screenshots of messages where he had pressured her to sign documents at work and to use her access for him. Her tone was not that of a woman seeking forgiveness. It was that of someone trying to distance herself from a sinking ship. I forwarded the email and attachments to Sophie without comment. Down the hall, I heard raised voices and looked up. Linda was standing with Olivia, her face pale, as Sophie quietly explained something to her. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments. They filed it this morning. Bruce is named in the complaint. Yes, Daniel too, as a secondary participant. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth. Olivia stared at the floor, her shoulders stiff. I walked closer. Linda looked at me with eyes full of hurt and confusion. "Is this true?" she asked. "About the company? About all of it?" "It is not my filing," I said. "But from what I've seen, yes, it's real." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't raise him for this." Olivia looked between us, her voice small. "He told me you were overreacting. He said none of this was serious." "It is serious, and I'm sorry you had to hear it like this." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Linda lowered herself onto a bench, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. Olivia sat beside her, glancing at me with eyes that held both anger and a kind of dawning recognition. I stepped away to give them space. As I turned, Daniel appeared at the end of the hall, his attorney on the phone a few steps behind him. He walked straight toward me, jaw clenched. "We need to talk," he said. "I do not think we do," I replied. He stepped closer. "Marina, you are blowing this out of proportion. You let that lawyer of yours paint me like some criminal. You know I am not that person." "You forged my name on a loan against my house," I said quietly. "You drained our account. You used our money to take your intern on vacation. The court has seen the evidence. This is not my imagination." His expression shifted, flickering between defensiveness and something like panic. "I can fix this," he said. "If you just tell them you did not understand, we can work something out between us. You do not have to drag this through court. Think about Olivia. Think about everything we have built." "Everything we built did not include you stealing from me," I answered. "And I am thinking about Olivia. That is why I am letting the law handle it." His hand tightened into a fist at his side, then loosened. "You really want to do this?" he whispered. "I am not the one who started it," I said. "But yes, I really do." His attorney called his name, and he turned away with a muttered curse. By late afternoon, I was back at Holt and Harbor. The familiar bell over the door, the soft music, the rolls of clothing, all greeted me like a different life that had somehow survived the blast. My staff looked up as I walked in. One of them asked gently how it went. "It went the way it needed to," I said. A longtime customer who happened to be at the counter reached out and squeezed my hand. "We're all rooting for you," she said. I felt the tightness in my chest ease, just a little. I moved behind the register, logged in, and let the everyday tasks of running my business wrap around me like a steadier kind of armor. Outside, the rain had stopped, and light was returning to the sky.
Chapter 5. Aftermath, Healing, and a New Beginning. A year later, the light looked different. I noticed it one morning standing in front of the new Holt and Harbor sign at the third location, this one in a small shopping center just outside Bellevue. The way the sun hit the glass, the way the logo reflected back at me, it felt like the city was offering a quiet nod of approval. What had once been a single boutique in a narrow Seattle storefront was now 3 stores, a small warehouse, and a team of women who believed in what we were building. My days were full in a different way. Instead of squeezing paperwork in around Daniel's moods and unpredictable spending, I scheduled meetings with accountants and buyers and designers. I knew where every dollar went. I knew which numbers could fluctuate and which could not. The anxiety that used to simmer under the surface of my life had given way to a steadier kind of responsibility. Sometimes, walking through the original store, I would catch glimpses of my old life, like reflections in a window. The version of me who bent over backward to make Daniel comfortable, who agreed to postpone her own goals so he could chase a promotion, who trusted that love alone would keep us safe. I did not hate that woman. I just knew I was not her anymore. News of Daniel reached me in fragments over the year. I did not look for it, but information has a way of traveling in a city like ours. Northwest Freight Line eventually cut him loose after the investigation into Bruce Carter moved from quiet inquiry to public record. Bruce's name appeared in local articles about financial misconduct and civil prosecutions. Daniel's name showed up too, a step or two behind, connected to transfers and approvals and numbers that did not line up. He did not go to prison, but he faced fines, restrictions, and a reputation that followed him into every interview. He ended up living in a small apartment in Tacoma, working a low-wage job that had nothing to do with management or trust. Linda mentioned it once in passing, her tone flat, as if she was still trying to reconcile the boy she had raised with the man the world now saw. Tessa left Seattle not long after the hearing. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she enrolled in classes at a community college near Portland and took on part-time work in a coffee shop. She had told friends that she had been taken in by a fantasy and was now learning what it meant to stand on her own feet. I did not feel responsible for her, but I was quietly relieved to know she was out of his orbit. The person I watched most closely over that year was not Daniel or Tessa. It was Olivia. The first months after the hearing were rough. She moved through the house with a shell around her, polite but distant, answering questions with as few words as possible. She still saw her father, shorter visits at first and then weekends when schedules allowed. She would come home with a different kind of tension in her shoulders, a mix of loyalty and discomfort she did not yet know how to name. One night, halfway through that year, she knocked on my bedroom door after I had already turned out the light. Her voice came through quietly. "Can I come in?" I told her yes and switched on the lamp. She sat at the end of the bed, twisting the edge of the blanket in her fingers. "He keeps saying you did this to ruin him," she said, "that you took everything he worked for." I watched her face, the conflict in it. "What do you think?" I asked. She swallowed. "I think he is lying to himself, and maybe to me. I know he did those things. I saw it in court. I read some of the articles. But when I am with him, he talks like none of it is his fault. He makes me feel guilty for not taking his side." I moved closer and rested my hand over hers. "You do not owe either of us your blind loyalty," I said. "You are allowed to believe what you see, not just what we say. You are allowed to love him and still be honest about his choices." She blinked hard and then let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it for months. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the things I said to you, for believing everything he told me. I just didn't want to lose my dad." "You did not lose him because of me," I said. "He made decisions that have consequences. That's between him and the world. You and I are still here. We can figure this out together." She leaned into me then, like she had when she was a little girl, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were on the same side of something instead of opposite ends. The invitation to speak at a women's business conference came toward the end of that year. At first, I almost said no. The idea of standing in front of a crowd and talking about my life made my stomach twist. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Everything I had been forced to learn about money and boundaries and contracts could either stay locked in my own story or be useful to someone else. The conference was held in a hotel ballroom near the waterfront. Rows of chairs filled with women of all ages, some in suits, some in jeans and sweaters, all carrying notebooks and hopes. When my turn came, I walked onto the small stage and told them the condensed version of my story. Not the gossip version, not the most dramatic headlines, but the parts that mattered. I talked about prenuptial agreements and separate property, about making sure your name on a deed meant what you thought it did. I talked about reading every document before signing it, asking questions, not feeling embarrassed to say you didn't understand something. I talked about the importance of having your own money, not because you plan to leave, but because you never know what you might have to survive. I also talked about love, about wanting connection does not require you to abandon your self-respect, about forgiving someone does not mean putting your future in their hands unchecked. The room was quiet in a way that felt electric. Afterward, women lined up to speak to me, to share their own stories, their almosts, their escapes, their regrets. It was heavy and light at the same time. A few weeks later, Linda walked into the original boutique on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked around with a small, sad smile before she found me, near the back, working on a display. We stood facing each other among the dresses. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You do not," but I could see in her eyes that she needed to say it. "I believed him because he was my son," she said. "I did not want to see what was in front of me. When you tried to show me, I held on to the picture of him I had in my head. That was not fair to you." I nodded slowly. "You did what motherhood do," I said. "You protected him. It just meant you couldn't protect yourself from who he actually became." She blinked away tears. "He still says none of this is his fault. He still talks like the world is against him." I felt a familiar ache for the man he had been and the one he refused to become. "I'm sorry," I told her, "for both of you." She took my hand briefly. "You did the right thing," she said, "even if it broke everything. I see that now." I thanked her and meant it. When she left, I felt a quieter kind of closure settle in. Back in my office, next to a framed photo of Olivia and I at the grand opening of the second store, hangs something that would probably look strange to anyone who didn't know the story. It's a printout of the first text Daniel sent me that morning in the boutique, the one where he announced he was leaving and that he had taken the money. People assume I keep it there out of spite, a trophy of some kind. That's not why it stays there. It reminds me of the exact moment I stopped building my life around someone who treated me as an afterthought. It marks the beginning, not the end. On a soft Seattle spring afternoon, I stepped out of the original Holton Harbor and locked the door behind me. The air smelled like wet pavement and blooming trees. Inside, my staff laughed over something at the counter. The sound drifted to me through the glass. Down the street, people crossed with coffee cups and grocery bags, each of them carrying their own invisible stories. I stood there for a minute, letting the sunlight touch my face. I felt tired and grateful and oddly peaceful. I hadn't chosen what Daniel did, but I had chosen every step afterward. That choice, again and again, had led me here, to a life that fit me better than the one I had clung to for so long. If you have listened to this and heard echoes of your own life and mine, I hope you take from it what you need. Maybe it's a reminder to check the numbers. Maybe it's the courage to ask harder questions. Maybe it's simply the reassurance that starting over is possible, even when it feels like something has been taken from you. If you feel comfortable, share your thoughts or your own story. You never know who might feel less alone because you were willing to speak. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they are not crazy for wanting respect and safety, maybe let them find this too.